I wanted to make a brief video regarding suicidality. And this is something that I wish I didn't have to cover. Suicide, taking your life, self harm is something that is incredibly serious and incredibly devastating. And, as a mental health professional, it's something that I have to deal with. I have to safety contract with my clients, but I also have to work with people to help people who they believe are in danger of harming themselves. And so I just want to cover a couple of basics, especially for those of us who don't have to deal with it quite a bit. But the issue then becomes is that you don't have to deal with it until you have to. And when you have to deal with it, knowing what to do is incredibly vital. And believe it or not, many of us may be put into a position where we have to save someone's life and don't even realize it. And so what I want to first do is I just want to start out with this concept of self-harm versus suicide. I think that when you look at the difference between the two, it matters, because I think sometimes when you're dealing with this subject of suicidality, it feels like anything regarding hurting yourself is automatically that, and that's not true. That's not the case. In fact, self-harm oftentimes can be managing symptoms. Self-harm can be reflective of not having skills and really kind of creating a way to try to medicate something deeper. Suicide typically is an exit out of a person's life situation that is permanent. It's difficult to know the difference between self-harm and suicide. And so oftentimes when I'm dealing with people, and by the way, I used to go out on site with law enforcement who would request a mental health professional like myself to do an on-site mental status exam to see if they needed to take someone to the emergency room and get them professional help or not. So I know what it's like to have to do this in a time crunch pressure situation. So one of the things that I ask people is, do you want to die, or do you want the pain to go away? Most times when I ask people if they want to die or they want the pain to go away, I would say probably 95 or more percent of the time, people just want the pain to go away. But this is something that I would ask people, and I would actually encourage you, if you're dealing with someone, or even if yourself, if you're having suicidal thoughts, do you want to die or do you want the pain to go away? Sometimes people will say both. If someone says, I want to die, you know that you've got a serious situation on your hands. If you ask them if they want to die and they say yes, you have to respond. And in certain states, like where I'm at in Nebraska, everybody is a mandated reporter. In different states, mandated reporter laws and so forth, they're different. But I would just say, as a good Samaritan, I would encourage everybody to take stock and take seriously when someone says that they want to die. And then if someone does want to die, a couple of tools that I would say that you need to sort of assess for. Even if you're not a mental health professional or anything like this is common knowledge that everyone can utilize. It's this idea of there's three prongs, right? There's lethality to a person's desire to want to commit suicide. There's access or means, and then there's having a plan. So let's say you ask somebody, do you want to die? And they say yes. And then you ask them, okay, well, what's your plan? And they don't have a plan. Okay, that tells you right then and there that they likely want the pain to go away. But you have to take it seriously regardless. But if somebody doesn't have a plan, like they don't know what they would do, that kind of lets you know that this person is a little bit more disoriented in terms of what they're feeling and what they want to do to resolve that. The next thing that I would say is that if someone does have a plan, do they actually have access to being able to carry out that plan? So here's why this matters, is that if someone says to you, yeah, I'm going to shoot myself, or I'm going to cut myself. And let's say they don't have access to a gun, but that's what they say they're absolutely going to do. Then that kind of lets you know, okay, this person, they have a plan, but they don't really have access to that. If they do have access to it, that's another red flag. That's not a pink flag. That's a red flag. If someone has access to something that could end them, that's something that should be a top priority. And then lastly, how lethal is their plan or certain components of what they want to do? So for example, if someone's like, I want to kill myself, and you ask them how they want to do it, and they say, well, I'm going to do it with a paperclip. Okay, I'm still going to take that seriously, but that's different from saying that I'm going to do it with a machete. Or I'm going to do it with pills, and I'm going to take certain types of pills, and here's when I'm going to do it. Like, so for example, when I used to go on site, I wouldn't just go to on site to someone's home, sometimes I would go to jail or I would go to a youth detention center. And what people would do is they would be very creative in terms of the timing. So in other words, if they had a chance to take a shower, the rules is that you can't watch someone when they're taking a shower. And so that's when they would sort of try to carry out their plan. A couple things that I would also say is that when it comes to men versus women, there are some gender differences as it relates to suicidality. Men typically are 3 times more likely to choose lethal means in terms of when they decide to carry out their plan for suicide. And the reason why this matters is because, and this isn't always the case, please hear what I'm saying and take it within in context. But typically for men, if they're gonna do it, they're gonna do it. It's gonna be something it's gonna have a finality to it. So here's what I would suggest in terms of a framework when you're thinking about helping someone who you believe is in real danger of hurting themselves. We have this term in the psychological community called protective factors versus risk factors. Protective factors are things that are keeping them here. Risk factors are things that are pulling them towards suicide. And so protective factors typically are community, that someone has got a family system that they're a part of, someone has support, someone has a job. Sometimes it's the fact that they don't want to hurt people. A lot of times, what keeps a lot of people here is the fact that they actually care about the impact on their loved ones and they don't want to put them through that. After a while, though, that's not a strong enough reason. That doesn't become a protective of enough factor, okay? But in some senses, at least in the immediacy, it is important. Then you have risk factors. So let's say someone doesn't have a support system. Someone is struggling financially. Someone doesn't have a community. Maybe they don't have a church. Maybe they've been exiled from a community that they were close to. And let's say they have access to all types of substances. And I mean, there's different risk factors that can pull someone, mental health issues, going off your medications, a huge breakup. Like, these risk factors pull people into the suicide orbit. And it's important to sort of kind of say, okay, let's look at the protective factors against the risk factors and do a little bit of math on which list is heavier, which list has more weight behind it. Another key thing that I would say to look for are these signs of improvement. So for example, sometimes you're dealing with someone who says, you know what? I was having suicidal thoughts the other day. I know you're really concerned about me. At this point, I'm just feeling great about life. And you're like, wait, what? You just went through this horrible situation, or you had this certainty behind not wanting to live, and now all of a sudden you're okay? Something seems off about that, because at times it can be off. It can be a red flag that somebody has gone into this autopilot phase of wanting to carry out their plan for suicide. And so I think some of us, we want people to feel better. We feel anxious. They're anxious, especially if you're a parent and your child is talking about harming themselves. Typically as parents, we don't feel safe if our children aren't safe. And you can take that to the bank. Regardless, you have to look at the story that someone is telling you about why they wanted to kill themselves or hurt themselves, and now why they're not. And what I would really suggest is, if someone has this sort of uptick in their mood and their posture has changed, to get curious and don't just sort of take that and then run with it and say that things are okay. A couple resources I want to put out there: the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is a lifeline that you can call if you're actively having thoughts about taking your life, if you're actively thinking about putting a plan together to harm yourself. This is a lifeline that I will put in the description that you can call for support. The other is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Also, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has different predictors and different statistics that I would highly recommend if you need some more information. And lastly, you have the Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. Again, I'm going to put all of this in the description. Guys, this is serious. And I thought, you know what? This is not something that I want to have happen to anyone, but this is not something that I'm not going to talk about and prepare people for, and give some people, maybe some skills or some tools on how to deal with this, because when it happens to you and you're not prepared, things can get really intense really quickly. I hope this helps. Thank you.